Global economic stability. In a liberal perspective, it makes the world safer. It mitigates the likelihood of a conflict. It allows everyone to live a better life. One of the requisites for this to be possible is a stable financial system, and a key player in the financial system is the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF. Despite the constant breakthroughs and controversies, the IMF remains to be one of the most prominent financial institutions, as it serves almost the entire international community. After World War II, the goal of multilateral institutions was to prevent economic nationalism, which was the leading cause of the war. The IMF's immediate post-war objective, when it was created in 1945, was to restore exchange rate stability of combatant countries, and eventually all countries, by contributing to the broader public good of international financial stability. At the time of its inception, this meant monitoring fixed exchange rates and providing emergency funding of foreign reserves to help maintain those fixed rates. Comprising 190 countries, the IMF objectives have expanded, and it now aims to stimulate global monetary cooperation, secure financial stability, facilitate international trade, promote high employment and sustainable economic growth, and reduce poverty around the world. The 190 member countries govern the organization, and the organization is accountable to its members in return. Its top 5 members are the US, Japan, Germany, France, and the UK. During the late 1980s, the economic policy initiated by the government that was considered to have led South Korea to its remarkable economic success in the late 1960s to 1980s was no longer applicable to the intensifying global competition. Instead, it resulted in corruption, inefficiency in the general economic sector, and weakening international competitiveness of South Korean corporations. South Korea was then hit by a financial crisis in 1997. Consequently, the international environment that had been friendly to South Korea's export-oriented strategy rapidly became hostile due to the intense competition from foreign countries in both domestic and international companies. The South Korean government overlooked the signs of weakening competitiveness and possibility of crisis and made the situation worse by making consecutive mistakes in its exchange rate policy and financial sector supervision. The first shock is the domestic level. South Korea's industrialization strategy focused on fostering the growth of chaebols, family-owned business conglomerates that were highly dependent on borrowing, specifically from the banking system. In exchange, the health of the banking system was extremely dependent on the viability of the chaebols. Due to the chaebols' high leverage ratios and low profitability, any shock to its cash flow would debilitate it. The economic cycle downturn in early 1997, wherein a series of large corporations filed bankruptcies, began with Hanbo Steel, the 14th largest chaebol. Before Korea turned to the IMF for assistance in November, 7 out of the top 30 chaebols, including Kia Motors, the 8th largest, already faced insolvency. This resulted in a surge of non-performing loans held by the commercial banks. The second shock is the international level, wherein drastic devaluation of the currencies of the crisis countries impeded South Korea's already worsened international competitiveness, and this contributed to strong downward pressure on the Korean currency. This trouble was a wake-up call for foreign investors to reevaluate the risk of investing in Korea, and to find out that Korea was already experiencing difficulties in the financial market, resulting in foreign investors withdrawing their investment in Korea's securities market and cutting back on their short-term loans to Korea. On December 3, 1997, Korea signed an agreement with the IMF for a financial aid package accounting to $58.3 billion, which was subject to a broad range of conditions, including macroeconomic stabilization and structural reform. In line with the IMF standby agreement, the Korean government was required to implement tough measures, including tight monetary policy, fiscal austerity, and the immediate closure of insolvent financial institutions in order to restore confidence and stabilize financial markets and lay the foundation for the resumption of sustained recovery in the real economy. As an emergency measure, the Korean government was also asked to raise the interest rates temporarily. This measure was expected to stem the outflow of foreign funds and the rapid depreciation of the exchange rate. By early 1998, financial stability was restored. The authorities also adopted an expansionary fiscal stance early in the program to mitigate the impact of the inevitable recession. The government recognized that the smooth implementation of adjustment policies would require broad social consensus, and it fashioned a tripartite accord involving labor, business, and the government. The authorities also strengthened the social safety net by expanding unemployment insurance system and providing direct support through public works programs, temporary livelihood protection, and other social programs. Furthermore, the structural reform agenda focused on liberalizing the capital account, restructuring the financial and corporate sectors, enhancing labor market flexibility, and improving data reporting. The restructuring effort also aimed at resolving the problem of non-performing loans, recapitalizing banks, and strengthening the institutional framework by bringing prudential regulations and supervision in line with international best practices.
Let's turn our attention now to Ghana. The West African state is seeking to have the International Monetary Fund extend its support program from a deadline of April 2018 to December of that same year.
Over the years, the IMF has been accused of being biased towards developed countries like South Korea, and especially those in the West. Nevertheless, the organization has also helped least developed countries, or LDCs, like Ghana, that had also experienced economic crises. Ghana strived to establish a stable democracy in the 1990s after years of colonial rule and political upheavals. The economy was also booming with the help of the revenue from exports of cocoa, gold, and oil, thus making poverty rates drop to 21% in 2012. However, Ghana's economy declined from 8% in 2012 to 3.5% in 2015. Current accounts and budget deficits were also broadening, inflation was worsening, and the currency was devaluing. Similar to what Korea went through, bad bank loans also piled up in Ghana. Unable to bounce back on their own, Ghana turned to the IMF to ask for a loan amounting to $918 million. The IMF approved to provide assistance to develop a three-part reform program that was aimed at faster economic growth and increased employment. The first part of the program was concentrated on the restoration of Ghana's debt sustainability. To accomplish this, the government had to temporarily limit hiring and spending on wages and eliminate subsidies for petroleum-based products and utilities. New revenue resources were also introduced. For example, tax increase for high earners. Furthermore, the Public Financial Management Act was implemented. The second part of the program was to solidify monetary policy by securing the inflation targeting framework, since inflation was one of the many problems that led to the decline. The inflation targeting framework may be applied by setting a specific inflation rate to achieve price stability. By doing so, the central bank's financing of the budget deficit will eventually come to an end. Finally, the third part of the program was to straighten out the banking system and preserve the stability of the sector. There was a need for an asset reassessment, hence some banks were recapitalized. Since the reform, Ghana has continued to recover gradually and high expectations were set for its 2019 economic outlook. The IMF continues to aid Ghana, especially now that the world is facing a pandemic and an economic recession triggered by it.
The International Monetary Fund says the coronavirus pandemic will cost the world's economies $9 trillion over the next 2 years. The warning comes as countries around the world face prolonged lockdowns as they try to contain the outbreak. The IMF's chief economist says it is the worst economic shock since the Great Depression of the 1930s.
Back here at home, and the alarming news tonight about the coronavirus, devastating at every level. The U.S. reporting more than 371,000 American lives lost.
CNN's Max Foster reports it's an attempt to block a new variant of coronavirus in the UK, one that appears to be much more contagious.
In the advent of COVID-19, which appeared in late 2019, taking the international stage in early 2020, and quickly becoming one of the deadliest pandemics in human history, the world economy has certainly taken quite a hit. The beginning stages of the pandemic sent the world into a panic frenzy, stocks dropping quickly with the fear that the pandemic would bring a massive economic recession. Social distancing and stay-at-home orders have caused people all over the world to lose their jobs and has even forced some companies to shut down completely. Even late into 2020, the IMF's World Economic Outlook predictions stated the global economy is coming back from the depths of its collapse in the first half of this year, but the ascent will likely be long, uneven, and uncertain. To help the global economy cope, the IMF has helped its member countries over the course of 2020, and continues to, by stepping in with emergency financing, grants for debt relief, calls for bilateral debt relief, enhancing liquidity, adjusting existing lending arrangements, policy advice, and capacity development. Specific cases of the IMF's policy advice and financing aid during the pandemic can be seen with countries like Brazil, whose government invoked the escape clause of their constitutional expenditure ceiling to allow for more spending on things such as employment support, lower taxes on medical supplies, temporary income support for vulnerable families, and pension for retirees. Another example would be South Africa, where the government helped struggling workers with the Unemployment Insurance Fund, or the UIF, and with funds for COVID-19 response, which would provide low-income families with tax subsidies for a few months, and most vulnerable families would receive social grants. Allocations were also made to help small and medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs, in the tourism and hospitality sectors especially, as well as small-scale farmers. Some member countries who also have received emergency financing include Albania with $190.5 million, Somalia with $395.55 million, and Panama with $515 million. In January 2021, Tobias Adrian, a financial counselor for the IMF, reported that while the IMF has gone to great lengths to aid the international community, there is a strong imperative for governments to be extra transparent with finances and for IMF authorities to prioritize financial crisis preparedness by learning from past mistakes. The IMF has been a crucial player in many countries' rehabilitation process in the wake of this global crisis that is unfortunately far from over. However, the IMF is committed to its principles of service and will continue to provide the aid that the global economy needs and lessen the blow for the coming months and years as we try to get back on our feet.
The International Monetary Fund has no doubt played a decisive role as a crisis manager for its member countries. Despite encountering criticism and facing challenges such as non-compliance with its lending conditions by some member states, they manage to take every lesson learned in stride and are continually looking to improve their services and aid, and have certainly shown success with their programs in other states. As it is, the COVID-19 global pandemic has put our global economy in a state of uncertainty, with previous projections saying that the economy would start to pick back up in the first quarter of 2021. But that itself is turning out to be delayed due to the still increasing number of cases and of severe unemployment levels worldwide. But as exemplified in the IMF's report on their website, which have been meticulously chronicled over the last year, we are bouncing back, slowly but surely, and the IMF has been fulfilling its end of the bargain by serving all of its member countries. But what do you think lies in the distant future for the IMF? Will this financial system be sustained in the years to come, even with the emergence of unprecedented events such as the COVID-19 pandemic? At this stage, things still seem relatively uncertain, so only time will tell.